And that was that was an interesting time, although I didn't know how interesting a time it would be. It was just a few weeks before the pandemic, and we talked about how difficult the rebuild of the Orioles was going to be, and how we didn't know how long it was going to take. And certainly we didn't know what was going to happen in 2020. But that was an interesting time. I know a few of you who are here today were there then, and a lot has happened since then, and a lot has happened this past off season. And I'm here to talk about what led up to it, what went on this off season, and what might go on in 2026. Heading into last season, the Orioles, as you know, were coming off 2 consecutive playoff appearances, and they were swept both times. So they had, the fans were a little antsy. They were hoping for much better in 2025, and last offseason was a very disappointing one for the Orioles. Let's go over that 2024 offseason. These are some of the players that they picked up: Charlie Morton, Tyler O'Neill, Ramon Laureano, Gary Sanchez, Tomoyaki Sagano, and Andrew Kittredge. Well, that wasn't a great offseason, but the Orioles thought that they just needed to plug some holes. Anthony Santander left, so they figured, or they knew he was going to leave, so they signed Tyler O'Neill. It turned out that Tyler O'Neill only played in 54 games.
Rich.
But Anthony Santander, when he went to the Blue Jays, he only played in 54 games. So that didn't turn out to be much of a loss. Corbin Burns left, and they brought in both Sagano and Morton. Morton turned out to be a disaster, and in fact, they kept Morton longer than they probably would have, because they had so many other injuries to starting pitchers. Otherwise, they probably would let him go. Sagano was okay. Corbin Burns, it turned out, only pitched several games for the Arizona Diamondbacks before he needed Tommy John surgery. So you would think, if I had told you that was going to happen, that the Orioles would be okay, but they weren't. They had an unbelievable number. They had an unbelievable number of injuries. They used 7 catchers. One of the mistakes that they made last offseason was signing Gary Sanchez instead of re-signing James McCann. If they had re-signed James McCann, then I think things would have been a little better. They wouldn't have won, but they wouldn't have needed to use 7 catchers. And Sanchez turned out to be a very bad signing for him. Kittredge actually turned out to be a good signing for him, and so did Ramon Laureano. And they were able to package Laureano and Ryan O'Hearn and get all those prospects from San Diego. But last season obviously was a bad year, 75 and 87. And I've covered the team for quite a while, and I've seen some good years and I've seen some bad years, but last year was a really bad year. But last year was a really bad, interesting year. There were a lot of interesting things that happened. Well, they fired their first manager in 15 years during the season. The last time they fired a manager during the season was in 2010 when they fired Dave Tremblay, and then they had Juan Samuel come in before Buck Showalter came in. I remember I had a speaking engagement in Owens Mills about 10 days before they let Brandon Hyde go, and the season was going very poorly, and everybody was angry, and everybody said, "Well, do you think that they're going to fire Brandon Hyde?" And I didn't think so. I thought that they'd give him a lot longer, certainly into June. But when they came back from the West Coast and they played horribly against Minnesota, and they played an awful game against the Washington Nationals, leaving I think 15 runners on base and lost by one run, they decided to they decided to change managers without really having an established manager in place. They had let Freddie Gonzalez go as bench coach after the 2020 season, and they were left with nobody who'd ever managed in the big leagues before. And they went to Tony Mansolino. And Mansolino, I thought, overall did a creditable job, considering what he had to work with. I like Tony Mansolino very much. I've gotten to know him very well. He's a very, very intelligent man, a very, very nice man, who was able to explain interesting parts of the game that I hadn't thought about. He would explain the reasons behind sending runners as a third base coach, and he seemed to care about his players, and he prevented a clubhouse meeting. He had a rough start. The first week I thought, oh geez, just going to get buried. But after a week or so, he seemed to get his sea legs and did I thought, as I said, a decent job, considering that barely 2 months later, they traded four relievers. Felix Bautista got hurt, and they traded, several excellent, they traded these decent players in O'Hearn and Laureano and Ramon Urias, and that left him without a real ball. That left him without an established bullpen. They didn't have a closer. Bautista had just gotten hurt. They traded Kittredge and Brian Baker and Gregory Soto and Sir Anthony Dominguez, and there was no closer. And they ended up trying.
You've seen the light.
Much less. I've come to life. They were left with Keegan Aiken as their closer. They'd never really closed before. I had a friend who worked with me I worked in television before I was a full-time sports writer. And this gentleman, who was a very accomplished television producer, used to tell me, in flux there is opportunity. And I remembered that with the Orioles, because they traded all these guys, so people got opportunities who didn't expect it. Jeremiah Jackson came and got to play in the last 2 months of the season, and he did a pretty good job for them. Nobody had heard of Jeremiah Jackson. He had been with them in spring training. He was one of those guys who they had signed, and no one knew who he was. He'd never played above Double A, and he played some in Triple A and did really well. And they brought him up because they didn't have anybody else to replace Ramon Urias. So they brought him up, and he had a decent couple of months. Cade Stroud had been buried in their farm system for years. He was a late round draft pick of Michael Myers in his first draft in 2019. Stroud came, and he did decently. They picked up a pitcher named Dietrich Enns, and Enns had pitched a little bit in the major leagues. He pitched in Japan, he pitched in Korea, and the Tigers had him and couldn't use him, and the Orioles took a shot at him, and he pitched decently. They picked up Rico Garcia, who they had a couple of years before. He pitched decently. So even with bad teams, you can have opportunities, and I think Mansolino was good at deciding who would pitch well, who could pitch well, and it turned out he had a 50-49 record, which wasn't bad, but the Orioles were expecting a lot more. I think the reason that a lot of fans wrote to me and said, well, why didn't they keep him? And I think one of the reasons, maybe the main reason, is that while the team played decently and while these guys like Jackson and Stroud pitched well, they didn't get good performances from their core players, their young core players. Gunnar Henderson, who revealed recently that he was hurt during the season. Gunnar Henderson didn't have the season that everybody was expecting. Adley Rutschman, on the injured list twice with oblique strains, hit well in a year and a half. Jordan Westburg. Westburg actually, if you extrapolated Westburg's numbers through 162 games, they would be okay, except he barely played half of them because he was hurt. Colton Cowser was hurt. Had a very bad year. Jackson Holliday. Holliday was his first full year. He played a lot better than he did in 2024, but he wasn't good. He wasn't good enough. So, if a couple of those guys had bumped up their performance in the last, couple of months, maybe they had seen something from them, that maybe Mansolino would have had a chance to come back, but he didn't. And I was not surprised that he didn't, and the Orioles hired Craig Alvarez. Going into the managerial search, there's a betting site. I'm not a gambler, but I look at them, and there was a betting site that listed the odds on who was going to be the next Oriole manager. And the favorite on that list was an old Oriole who's now a coach for the Chicago Cubs named Ryan Flaherty. Well, they didn't. That was just a guess because that was sort of connect the dots. And Alvarez was on the list. He was way down. He was 22-1, and his odds were equal to Buck Showalter's. The odds of Buck Showalter coming back to manage the Orioles were equal to me coming and managing. It wasn't going to happen. And it was a very, very strange off-season for managerial hires, because everybody always has lists of guys who they think are going to get hired, but there were so many interesting, unexpected developments. The San Francisco Giants hired Tony Vitello from the University of Tennessee. First time ever a guy who had no professional baseball experience was hired from a college campus to manage in big leagues. Kurt Suzuki, who hadn't coached or managed, was hired to manage the Angels. Craig Stammen, a really excellent relief pitcher over the years, was surprisingly hired to manage the San Diego Padres. So there were all these unexpected managerial hires, and the Orioles were able to hire Craig Alvarez. I don't know exactly how many people were interviewed by Mike Elias, probably 5 or 6. But Alvarez, it seems, I've gotten I spent some time with him at the winter meetings, and he seems like a really bright, kind of edgy guy. I think he's going to be a lot. I think he's going to be a lot different from what you've seen over the years with Mansolino and Brandon Hyde and Buck Showalter. But it's his first time, and I've promised myself I'm not going to make any judgments on him until at least the first month of the season. After I go through spring training with him, after I see him manage up close for a month or so, because it is his first time. But I think I think it was an interesting choice, and this has been obviously a really active off season, very active off season, and like you, I was absolutely astounded when they traded Grayson Rodriguez. I never saw that coming. I was sitting by my computer. I actually don't like staying up in the off-season. I don't like staying up very late, but I know I have to usually stay up till about 11 or so in case something happens. At about 10:15, I got an alert that they made this trade, and at first I thought it was one of those phony Twitter sites making up a trade. I had to look for 20 seconds to make sure I wasn't going to post something that wasn't true. But they traded Rodriguez for Taylor Ward, and the reason that I think that there were a couple of reasons I think that they traded Rodriguez. One of them was because they had just gotten sort of tired of waiting for him to fulfill his potential, and they needed another right-handed hitter to make up for the lack of performance from Tyler O'Neill. And Rodriguez, if they had Rodriguez in this rotation, you have Kyle Bradish, who only pitched in 6 games after having Tommy John surgery in June 2024. Tyler Wells, who only pitched in 4 games after having elbow surgery in June 2024. And Rodriguez, who hasn't pitched since July 31st, 2024. I don't think that having those 3 guys in the same rotation was palatable to them because they didn't think that they had enough innings in them to get them through, get them through a whole year. So they decided, in essence, to replace Rodriguez with Shane Baz. And if you looked at what Shane Baz did last year, he pitched 166 in the 3rd innings, which is sort of what they're looking for. If you're looking for a starting pitcher, you want somebody who can pitch 31 times a year, average maybe 6 innings. So you want somebody who can get you to 180 innings. They didn't have anybody who did quite that, though Kramer and Sagano came close last year. But if you can come up with 4 or 5 of those guys, then you're doing okay. But I don't think they feel confident enough that Bradish and Wells are going to be able to go that whole distance without with the benefit of just having 6 starts for Bradish and 4 for Wells over the last 20 months. So that's why I think they traded. That's why I think they traded Rodriguez. They paid a really hefty price for Shane Baz, 4 top 30 draft choices, but none of those guys was going to pitch with the team that was going to play for the team this year. In fact, some of them you might not see them in the big leagues until 2028 or 2029, and the Orioles are obviously in a win now situation. So those were totally unexpected, and even more unexpected was them signing Pete Alonso. And everybody, I saw somebody in here with an Alonso jersey. I don't know if you're a relative or I don't know if you're a relative, but that was, I didn't see that one coming. I was at the winter meetings when that news broke, and fans were just thrilled because that showed the fans that they were going to go out and spend money. The Orioles hadn't paid that much money. They hadn't given a free agent a 5-year contract. So that got a lot of the fans excited, and it should. And then they also added a closer, Ryan Helsley, who I think could be pretty good. Though I have some questions about their bullpen, but I think Helsley could be a really good addition. And an underrated addition was bringing back Andrew Kittredge. They were able to get Kittredge, plus when they traded Kittredge in July, they got a really good young prospect, Wilfie Dela Cruz, who's years away from playing the big leagues, but they were able to get him from the Cubs and then able to get Kittredge back. So I think the combination of Kittredge and Helsley and some of the guys that they had before, could be a decent bullpen. And I know a lot of you are really eager to find out what they're going to do with the rotation. The way I see the rotation right now would be Bradish number 1, Trevor Rogers number 2, Baz 3, and then you have Dean Kramer in there. So, and also you have Zach Eflin, who was re-signed. I don't know that Eflin is going to be ready for opening day or not, but I think Eflin was a depth signing. And Tyler Wells is a really interesting case. I don't know whether he's going to be a starter, whether he's going to be a reliever, or whether he's going to be both. I mean, my guess here is he's going to be both. I think they're still going to get another starter within the next few weeks, whether they're able to sign Framber Valdez. And I know I wrote yesterday about Justin Verlander, and a lot of fans were not happy with the idea of Justin Verlander, but I think Verlander would be fine as another depth piece like Eflin, because like people like to say, you can never have enough starting pitching, or I like to say, as a reporter, you can never have enough star power in the clubhouse, because having Verlander would be, I think, great. One of the things that intrigues me about Verlander is that he sleeps 10 hours a day. I don't know. I'm a pretty good sleeper, but I don't know the last time I slept 10 hours a day. Maybe some of you guys have, but I haven't. But I want to find out the secret to sleeping 10 hours a day. But I don't know that Justin Verlander is going to be here. I don't know that Framber Valdez is going to be here. I guess you can ask Sig this afternoon, but I don't know that Sig's going to be able to answer that. But I think that the team itself should be improved. I know the same betting site that had Alvarez as a 22-1 shot had the Orioles at 84.5 wins going into the season, which I think is fair. That I think that they're better, but without assurance that those 5 core young players are going to take steps up. I don't see that they're going to be better. I don't see that they're going to be better than that. They need, Alonso's going to help. Helsley's going to help. I think Ward is going to help. But what they need are, and I can't emphasize it enough, they need is Rutschman to do well, Henderson to do better, Cowser, Westberg, Holiday, all to step up. If they can get good seasons from 3 of those 5 players, then I think you might have a fun season in Baltimore. I think it's going to be an interesting season. I think right now I would have them as a contender for one of the last playoff spots. I think the Blue Jays seem to be very, very strong. The Red Sox have been very, very aggressive as of late. Snatching up Ranger Suarez and then getting Sonny Gray. So I think that the Red Sox are going to be good, and the Yankees haven't done much, but I think that the Orioles can be with sort of that group of playoff teams, or playoff contenders that you see in the Central and in the West. Houston and Seattle. And Texas and Cleveland and Kansas City. I think that they're in that path. So with that, I'll be happy to answer all your questions. Back.
How do you think Mountcastle factors into Alonso at first base?
Yeah.
Much good fielder going on.
That's a good question. The question is, how do I think Ryan Mountcastle will fare, because he's a better fielder than Alonso? Well, one of the remaining questions that I have is, are the Orioles going to go into the season having both Kobe Mayo and Ryan Mountcastle on the 26-man roster? I don't know that it's really possible to have both of them on the roster. I don't know that there's enough at bats, though I think they think that there are. Mountcastle's been hurt a lot the last couple of years. Last year he missed more than 2 months with a hamstring. He hasn't hit well in the last couple of years. He hasn't done well with them moving the fence out, and bringing it back in. He only has a year before free agency. I'm shocked that he's still with the Orioles. I was pretty convinced that they were going to non-tender him, and I think he kind of expected that as well. But I think that he fits in more as a designated hitter. Alonso doesn't want to be a designated hitter. He likes playing first base. He's not a great first baseman, but he wants to play every day, and he wants to be a first baseman. And I think that he's going to be there for 5 years, and Mountcastle might only be there for a year. I know he has an option for 2027, but I would guess that they try and package Mountcastle in a deal between now and now in spring training. But I've been saying that for a while, so I don't know. Trying to guess Mike Elias's moves, very, very difficult. I've been trying to guess Mike Elias's moves for the last 7.5 years, and I still haven't figured them out. I can look at them in retrospect and see what they're trying to do, but I don't know. As I said, I was just surprised that Mountcastle was still here, but I know that they think highly of him. So, any more? Beth.
What are the chances that they sign another center fielder?
What are the chances that they sign another center fielder? Well, I think it's possible. They did go out and get Leody Taveras as a free agent, and Taveras hasn't hit well the last couple of years, and I think that they're looking at him as more of a defensive replacement, sort of a fifth outfielder. Harrison Bader is still out there, and I'm a Bader fan. He's one of the better. He's the best center fielder that's still out in the market. I don't know that they're going to go out and spend that much if they're going to add another starting pitcher. But I think it's possible. I think it's possible that they'll get another center fielder. I don't think that they're going to get Bader. Early in the season, in the offseason, I thought that was possible. I don't think so, but last year, right near the end, this time of the offseason, he went out and got Laureano, and he got Dylan Carlson. Laureano who helped, and Dylan Carlson who did. Okay, in the back.
What's going to happen with Kobe Mayo and Basillo?
What's going to happen with Kobe Mayo and Samuel Basillo? Well, I look at Basillo as, assuming that Rutschman is healthy and Basillo is healthy, I would think that Rutschman would play about 100 games behind the plate, and Basillo would play about 60. He may play some games as he may be, a left-handed DH. Mayo may be a right-handed DH. I don't think you'll see a lot of him at first base because I think Alonso is going to play nearly every day, and if Mountcastle's there, I think I think he may pick up the few games. So I don't really see Basillo playing first base. I see him now being a catcher, DH kind of guy.
They're going to keep him in the system, or are they going to become trade bait?
Are they going to keep Mayo in the? Is the question? Are they going to keep Mayo in the system? Or
Mayo
is
and Basillo both.
Basillo's not. They signed Basillo to an 8-year, $67 million contract. He's not going anywhere. Mayo, yes, Mayo could be dealt. A year ago, he was the 14th ranked prospect in baseball, and he played decently, played pretty well in September when he had the chance. So I think that they'd like to give him more of a chance, but if there's a really good pitcher they can get for Kobe Mayo, I think that they will.
Thank you.
Sir.
I just had a question about Adley Rutschman. It's probably tough for you to answer this, but the fact that he was a #1 draft pick, has an incredible resume with really accomplished in college, and he was drafted a lot was expected of him, and he had a great, fantastic start. Since that time, he's been injured here and there, and he's underperformed. Do you think it's a little bit unfair that the fan base were expecting him to do exactly what he did the first year, and maybe his real potential is somewhere in between that year and where he performed? And is it probably to achieve what he did the first year again? Yeah, I know it's tough to answer that, but there just seems to be a little pressure on him to keep doing what he did the first season. I'm not sure anybody can do what he did the first season again and again and again.
Sure. Question is about Adley Rutschman. Can he be as good as he was in the first year? Is there too much pressure on him? Well, one thing that fans don't realize about Adley Rutschman is he arguably had his best defensive season in 2025. If you look at the defensive metrics, they were very, very good. In fact, Mansolino said late in the season, well, this is, and he watched him, he watched him in his 4 years with the Orioles. He said, yeah, this was the best defensively that he had seen him play. I think it's fair to think that he's going to be as good, he should be as good as he was the first year, because that was, basically, he was the reason that the Orioles surprised and nearly got in the playoffs in 2022. Once they brought him up on Preakness Day, after, it took him about 10 days until he started hitting, but once he started hitting, the team started playing well, and he was the reason why. And in order for them to play well, if he doesn't play well this year, I don't think it's fair to let Samuel Basallo, who's just 21, be the number one catcher and expect him to play 120 games and hit 260 with 20 homers and 60 RBIs. I think that might be a little much for Basallo right now. A year or two from now, no. But they need Adley Rutschman. And yes, the fan, I get all sorts of emails from people when I have my mailbag, and they ask, well, is he a bust? He's not a bust. He's a disappointment. There's a different, a bust would be a guy who didn't play at all. He was a two-time All-Star. He finished second Rookie of the Year, but for some reason, he hasn't hit in the last, since the All-Star game in 2024. This is going to be a big year for Rutschman and a big year for the Orioles. If Rutschman doesn't play well, I don't see the Orioles, I don't see the Orioles doing very well.
Yes,
Sir.
Going back to the outfield, you still got Cody Bellinger, so Bellinger.
The question is, do you think that the Orioles would be a contender to get Cody Bellinger? And the answer is no. I think Bellinger is probably in the Alonso range of money, I guess. And I think if they're going to spend money, it's going to be on the starting pitcher. I think that yes, yes, he would be helpful. But there are a lot of players that would be helpful that I don't think that they could afford. I think he would be pretty low on the priority list.
I have a question that it's more general baseball, not just
Sure.
the Orioles. And you kind of touched upon it a little bit already. In the offseason, there were I think 9 new managers, right? And almost all of them really had no experience. I'd like to hear your thoughts on how much you think that is because the front offices are now really this kind of scripting game. And in fact, I think it was the Marlins last season. They spent the last 2 weeks. I think they actually scripted all the pitchers, something like that.
The question is about, do I think that the reason that there were unconventional managers hired was because the front office doesn't value experience? Well, first of all, it's interesting because there were I guess 8 or 9 managers replaced, and now in the NFL, if you don't know, Sean McDermott was fired this morning by the Buffalo Bills. So there's a lot of there's been a lot of changes in football coaches and and managers, and it just seems that I think you're correct. Actually, I think that in baseball, I think that the days of the all-powerful manager are gone. I mean, you guys, a lot of us grew up with Earl Weaver and Casey Stengel, and when I was a little kid, Leo Durocher was back managing with the Cubs. But those guys are gone. I think sort of Dusty Baker and Buck were the last 2 all-powerful managers. Terry Francona to an extent. But I think that it's viewed as such a collaborative position. And one of the things that they want managers to do now is sort of be more psychologists, more, keeping their players, their clubhouse happy, making sure that players, know their roles and are able to communicate what the front office wants. So I don't know that that's a great thing for baseball. I kind of enjoy having, and it was great, it's great talking to those, older personality managers because they have great stories and experiences that some of the others don't. So yeah, I think you are onto something. Sir.
Do you see the uncertainty in the upcoming collective bargaining agreement affecting teams' calculus at all?
Do I see the upcoming labor negotiations affecting what teams are doing? Right now, I don't really see it because, well, the Orioles went out and they got a lot. So I don't know that this off season, has been much different than other off seasons. I'm trying not to think about what's going to happen a year from now because I think it's going to be unfortunate for the game. I think it's very short-sighted to try and do that because you're hurting your. I don't think that they can accomplish what they want to accomplish without severely hurting the fans. I mean, here you are. Most of the people here have been through, several labor disputes as fans, and they're not fun. And you always lose some fans. Some fans will just say, "Oh, I had it. It's millionaires versus billionaires. Who cares about that?" And fans will drift away. But what happens? What's more important in a labor dispute is that the 8-year-olds or the 9-year-olds or the 10-year-olds who are going to go to their first games won't go to their first games. Their parents or their uncles or their grandparents or their friends' parents won't take them to games. So I think that's something that I would be afraid of as someone who makes his living out of watching baseball. And it's something I don't want to think about, but unfortunately I think I'm going to have to think about it a lot over the next year.
What are the Orioles' plans for Mike Schilt? And was he an Albernaz hire? Albernaz recommended him?
Question is, what are the Orioles' plans for Mike Schilt? And was he an Albernaz hire? Mike Schilt, if you don't know, was the manager of the San Diego Padres who left voluntarily after the season. And if you read our website tomorrow, you'll read the interview that I'm going to do with him after I leave here today. And hopefully, well, if barring other news, if there's other news, that'll wait. But I wouldn't ordinarily tell you who I'm going to interview, but since it's Mike Schilt, I'm supposed to talk to him this afternoon. But he was not hired he was hired as a coordinator to help with the more experienced minor leaguers. The upper level is called the upper level field coordinator, working with Bowie and Norfolk. I'll find out more of what he's going to do today. He was hired by Mike Elias and not Craig Albernaz. He and Elias worked together in St. Louis, so that's where that came from. So.
Really get Framberg Valdez. Two-part question. One, what's the chance we can get him? Supposedly the Elias's relationship with that. And then if they are able to sign him, supposedly Valdez delivery his catcher last fall.
Okay, the question is about Framber Valdez is, what are the chances that the Orioles sign him? Does his previous relationship with Mike Elias help? And did his incident where he crossed up his catcher last year, would that stop the Orioles from signing him? I think that their chances of signing him are decent. I don't know exactly what they're looking for, what the Valdez's camp is looking for. I would think if they could get him in the area of I'm just throwing this out. 5 years, $150 million, I think that would be decent. I don't think his time at Houston and Elias's time there really matter. And I think that they've already talked to him. They talked about him at the general managers meetings back in Las Vegas back in November. So they are, they are interested, and I don't think that this crossing up the capture is going to be any issue at all. David,
What's the future of Heston Kerstad?
David asked, what's the future of Heston Kerstad? That's a question that I have for Mike Elias. Because that's a really good one. If you don't know, Heston Kerstad hasn't played since last July when he wasn't hitting very well for Norfolk after he'd been with the Orioles, and he was shelved with with exhaustion. And from what we know, there's been some kind of he's had medical treatment, medical attention. Elias has said it's gone well, although I'll know more in 3 weeks when I'm down in Sarasota, and we'll see if he's ready to play. I think right now they're not counting on him for anything. They have enough, with Dylan Beavers and Cowser and O'Neill and Taylor Ward and Tavares. I think that they have 5 outfielders right now. So I don't think that there's going to be, I don't think that he really has a chance to make the team. I think that they want to see him go down in Norfolk and really play well. And if he really played well, then they do something with him. He could also, if he played well, be trade bait because they have a lot of guys like that. So I don't know that they're expecting anything from him, and whatever they get is a plus.
Is it too late to return his jersey?
Is it too late to return his jersey? I don't know if he'd accept it. Ma'am.
Do you have any idea where Brandon Young's role might be? Because he did pretty well. I mean, he had a perfect inning in his 5th start. So.
Well, questions about Brandon Young. He had an immaculate inning. He had an immaculate inning. In fact, I'm such a close watcher of games that I watched that inning and didn't realize it was an immaculate inning.
I was sorry, and I looked at her and I went, were there any foul balls?
And then later, a few months later, I was in San Diego and Mason Miller threw one against the Orioles, and I didn't know it was an immaculate inning. But also he threw that 7 2/3 innings of 7 2/3 perfect innings in Houston, and then in the next start he got hurt. I think they're looking at Brandon Young as sort of a depth piece as a starter. Maybe they'll try him in the bullpen, but I think that I think he'll get a real opportunity, but I don't know that he's at the top of their list.
And he has options, right?
He has 3. Yes, he has 2 more. He has 2 more options. So he's somebody who's certainly optionable, which is a problem with the bullpen because a lot of the bullpen pitchers, a lot of the relievers they have don't have options, but they do have options with Young. So I think he and I think Cade Povich could very well be interesting depth pieces for him. Any more? Sir. You.
Do you know any details about the arrangement, the new Orioles owners, arrangement with the National owners, and that massive deal?
Do I know anything about the Orioles and the Nationals settlement of the Masson deal? No, I don't. That's kept quiet. But the Orioles and I think that was a very, very positive thing for baseball in this area, that they finally were able to settle the Masson deal, and the Nationals are no longer going to be on Masson. Masson actually tried to get them back on their network, but they preferred to go with a new arrangement with Major League Baseball. But part of the arrangement is that the Orioles and Nationals are going to play exhibition games this year. They're playing one, I think it's March 22nd in Baltimore, and then one in Washington next day, March 23rd. So I know that that's part of the arrangement. Sir.
Speaking of that, do you know if they're going to do streaming like they did last year?
The question is, do I know if they're going to do streaming? The answer is yes, they are going to do streaming. They haven't said what, it turned out to be a success, I think. But they are going to do streaming because they're doing 20 games from spring training. They're going to have 20 telecasts from spring training, but many more than they've had in the past. And the reason that they're doing 20 games is because there's no longer, the Nationals are no longer part of Masson. And in the past, if the Orioles had 6 telecasts from Florida, Masson had to have 6 telecasts from the Nationals. And the Nationals games were very low rated, and they were losing quite a lot of money on those. So that's why there wasn't, there weren't very many Grapefruit League games from Florida. And now that that's done, you'll be able to see a lot. You'll be able to see most of them actually, 20. So now, back there.
Do you think they're going to keep Masson long term? Because I like the top broadcasters. Yes, I think he's some of the best in like baseball. Do you think they're going to keep Masson long term?
The question is, do I think that they're going to keep Masson for the long term? I don't know, because I don't know what Masson is worth right now. Years ago I was with when David introduced me, he read, well, I work for Comcast, and so I have some experience working for regional sports networks. And I can tell you that when I was with Comcast, Bud Selig tried very hard to broker a deal so that Comcast would buy Masson and then settle the Masson deal, and that the Masson dispute, and that didn't work. And since the days of the regional sports networks, strengths is obviously gone. I mean, so many people have cut the cord, and they go for streaming instead. And I don't know that there's a great long-term outlook unless Mr. Rubenstein and Michael Arrighetti think that Masson can be profitable. But in a few years, and this is getting way past my area of expertise, but in a few years, I know Rob Manfred is waiting to see how the collective bargaining agreement goes, and then he wants to get a better long-term sort of conjunctive television agreement where more teams are showing their games through Major League Baseball, because now you have about 7 or 8 teams that are, including the Nationals, that are showing their games, and it's being distributed by Major League Baseball because of the weaknesses of the regional sports nets. And as for the announcers, well, the Orioles hired their announcers, and I know Kevin Brown and Ben McDonald and Jim Palmer are very popular, and I don't see them going anywhere. And even if the Orioles went with Major League Baseball, they'd still have the control over their announcers, and MLB would. Any more?
Last question?
One more? Okay.
Yeah, you mentioned not being concerned about the bullpen. You see that more moves there. I know that's always just throw a bunch of guys up against the wall, but do they have enough guys to sort of work out a good workable bullpen?
Yeah, question is about the bullpen. Do they have enough guys to make it work? Well, last year there were 15 guys who relieved in 15 or more games for the Orioles, and the bullpen wasn't a huge issue last year. It was okay, it was okay. But I think when you have Helsley and you have Kittredge, you have Stroud, Yarmil Geraldo, and there are a number of other. I mean, they have Albert Suarez. They have Albert Suarez back. They just picked up Jose Suarez on waivers. Grant Wolfram, Dietrich Enns. I think I went and I looked at all the guys who they're probably going to bring to spring training. I think that I see that I see 15 guys who could pitch 15 or more games. And I think, yeah, they could still go and pick up some more guys in the next, in the next couple of weeks. But one thing that the Orioles have done, I think, is they've been able to get guys, to get starters. I mean, before, Brandon Young was mentioned,